Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 18. What can Legos teach us about open source intelligence? So, Legos are amazing. If you're not familiar with Legos, I don't know where you've been for the last 100 years, but they're these tiny little blocks made out of plastic that you can use to basically put together to make anything. And one of the things that's really just amazing about Legos is that fact. You can take them and make just about anything that you can put your mind to. Now, way back when, when I was growing up and even earlier, Legos were primarily just sold in kind of imaginary sets. They did have these little things that you could buy that were actually like kits that kind of made certain things. But a lot of the Legos that are sold today are actually like genuinely Lego sets. And one of the beautiful things about Legos is that even if you don't have, that specific set, if you have enough Legos, you can build any of the sets that they have out. There are very, very few pieces that are unique and individual to a specific Lego set. And so, if you've gathered all of these different pieces together and you have the instructions, or you have a good enough eye for engineering, or you legally download the instructions from the internet. I have no idea if that's illegal or not, but I'm sure somebody has them available out on the internet for free. Then you can build your own versions of those Lego sets. And they might not be perfect exact copies, because there do tend to be one or two pieces that are pretty, if not unique, at least very special to a specific set. One of the things that comes to mind is the Lego X-Wing. They have an X-Wing model, and there are these pieces that form the engines of the X-Wings, and I don't think I've seen them on any other set anywhere. And that there are small pieces like that just about in every set that they have. But if you have enough pieces, you theoretically might actually have those pieces as well. But at any rate, the point being is that you can build anything with Legos that your mind that comes to mind. And one of the things with open source intelligence we have is that there are actually two sides of open source intelligence. There's essentially the offensive side and the defensive side of open source intelligence. And we're actually going to cover both and how they relate here. But open source intelligence, it has a lot to do with social engineering as well. A little bit about open source intelligence in our first episode. What can the game The Chameleon teach us about social engineering? So I'm going to try not to be too redundant here, but in essence, open source intelligence is the ability for somebody to go out into the internet and find information about you. And in an offensive mindset, that is typically somebody going to social media or other websites and just finding about as much information about you as possible. And it is nearly impossible for you as an individual to not be on the internet, because a lot of what you do ends up getting posted on some sort of public feed. So, like, if you've bought a house, if you've had a significant purchase or significant accomplishment, that'll be on the internet. If you've ever been in the news for anything, all of that gets posted to the internet. And then there are also things like personal information feeds, because anytime you move, anytime you sign a new lease, anytime you buy a new car, things like that, you leave a trail marker on the internet, because those things get recorded somewhere and they get reported. And also, there are companies that are very messy with some of their details, and that's how some of that information gets leaked as well. Because, like, if you have a company that just exposes the information out for their user research or whatever, telemarketing company who gives no shits about you as a person, if they have your information, they could very well expose that. And then that information gets leaked out to the greater internet. And once it's on the internet, it is indelible. It is now on there permanently. You cannot remove information that's on the internet. You can try, God, my God, can you try? But it is going to literally be on the internet forever. And it's one of those things that this fact is one of those reasons why I'm glad I am not a kid growing up today, because some of the stupid shit that I did as a kid would be indelible on the internet today. And I would really not like some of those embarrassing cringe moments to be permanently available on the internet for everybody to see. Um, anyways, the the with open source intelligence, you're as an offensive open source intelligence using it in a offensive way, or even as an attacker. What I am doing is I'm grabbing everything about your life that I can openly establish. So I'm going out and finding where you've lived, who your family is, who your contacts are, finding all the information I can about you. And if I'm targeting a specific person, I'm going to create essentially what is known as a dossier. And it's basically a fancy term for a bunch of information about a person. You may have heard dossier in certain things like spy movies or bad detective movies. A dossier is basically just the information about a person and how it links within their lives. And so, with a particular set of data from open source intelligence, where I've grabbed all this information about you as a person, I can create this dossier and kind of gain more facts about your life. I can intuit a few things, and while might not think anything of it, that does give me the ability to kind of predict certain things about you. For like, if you post a bunch of pictures of your dog on your Facebook and you're like, oh my God, I love my dog all the time, I am going to make a reasonable assumption that your password might have something to do with your dog, might have something to do with your dog's name or your dog breed or whatever. And that kind of lowers the threshold for me to be able to guess your passwords. Not always true, because in circumstances, myself included, my passwords are completely random, and I don't even know half my passwords. So it's not a perfect system. But the other things you can do with open source intelligence from an organizational perspective is, as I create this dossier about your company, if I can find out who works there, who does what, and who reports to whom, I can create this dossier and link everything within an organization. And so I know more about it. And we do this in physical penetration tests where we do this open source intelligence to see how much information we can find out about a company. And for instance, if you're a company that has a Facebook presence and you decide, hey, you know, it'd be really nice is to kind of show everybody a day in the life of people that work at our organization. And so you create this 20-30 minute a day in the life video where it shows just a bunch of people working and all this other stuff. And you were very careful to not show things like the computer screens that people are working on. You're very careful to not show pertinent information, protected information. But in one frame, you have somebody who has their ID badge plainly visible. And from this image, somebody could go, oh yeah, and screenshot that badge, and now they have your badge. They know what it looks like, and so they can create a duplicate. On top of that, with all of this data where you're showing people working together, one live example that we've seen is somebody did one of these videos and they actually had a small short clip of their entire IT staff in like 5 seconds. And so as an open source intelligence, as somebody who's going to perform penetration testing at your company, I'm going to take that screenshot of all those people and I'm going to find out who they are. And I'm going to take their faces and feed it to AI and say, hey, find this person for me on the internet. And it's going to give me that data. You can do Google a reverse image search and find people's faces through that. And it will give you the context. You'll be able to find out who all those people are and how they link within an organization. And so with this information, I've basically collected some very key details. I've figured out who your IT people are. I've also figured out what badge looks like. Now, a lot of organizations also tend to like to put their leadership on their website, which I do not approve of. I don't understand why people insist on having their faces on the internet, but they post their leadership on there. And so combined with all this information, I have a really good working idea of what's going on in your organization. I can see this information about who's in your IT department. I know what your badge is, and I know who the bosses are within your company. So if I were going to perform a penetration test, or if I were actually going to attack your company in a physical manner, say for instance, the attack that occurred on Caesars Casino and MGM Casino, they were attacked in a similar manner. Somebody had inside information about who worked there and basically talked their way into getting their help desk into performing certain actions. And so this open source intelligence allows them to do this. It allows them to go in and basically collect this information. And then when I contact you as an organization, if I have this inside information, I can be like, hey, I know this boss name. I know Ryan, who probably isn't working today. I'd really like to make sure I give them this gift. If you could meet me by the door and I can just hand you this, that'd be great. And even though that doesn't sound terribly malicious, you have no idea what the intent is behind it. And so it doesn't matter what an attacker is going to use the information for. The fact that they're going to use the information is really what you need in mind. So how do we protect ourselves from this? What do we do to protect ourselves? Well, unfortunately, kind of like I said at the top, you're not going to be able to remove the pieces of your life from the internet. You're not going to be able to remove those Legos. You're not going to be able to disassemble the imagery that people have already been able to create based on the pieces that you've left just laying around. Those instructions are already there. And so you're not going to be able to pull those blocks back. But what you can do is you can make sure that you don't add more blocks, more key pieces, more unique pieces to the internet. One of the things that I definitely tell people is if you need to put your team on the internet, make sure it's behind some sort of wall that somebody has to be a client to get to. One of the things that really helps is if you need to have a public presence where you have your face everywhere, try to anonymize your information as much as possible. Definitely don't put your email on there. Definitely don't put your phone number on there. Let people find that information out for themselves. Have a generic contact position for people to get information through. Other ways you can protect yourself on this is just don't post shit. Don't put more shit on the internet for people to receive. Don't use social media. Don't attach it to your work. Don't attach it to your normal life. Try to keep everything separate. Because one of the mistakes that a lot of people will make is they'll link their Intune to their Facebook or to their Instagram, whatever. And that's just bad. That's a bad idea. You're giving people more information about what's going on in your life. And you're potentially creating an environment or a situation where somebody will be able to garner information about you that you don't want them to have. And even if you think it might be benign, you have no idea what an attacker will find useful. So, and I think I covered that in episode 1 as well. So that's all redundant information. But again, remember that these are the Lego pieces that people are putting together. The information, the crumbs, the bricks that you leave on the internet are small pieces that they can use to put together the model that is you, so that they can then use that to create a fuller picture and eventually get in and create their own version of the Lego X-Wing that is your life or your organization's internal workings. That is the entire point of this. So that covers open source intelligence from a perspective of offensive or malicious intent. How can we use open source intelligence in a defensive posture, in a defensive intent? Well, just like with the offensive side, with the malicious side, there is open source intelligence that will allow you to identify attackers, that will allow you to identify specific malware and things like that. And open source intelligence is something that is actually, I think, one of the most unique and wonderful things about the security industry, the cybersecurity industry as a whole, because a vast majority of cybersecurity experts and threat hunters and people who have been in this industry for such a long time believe that all of this information about threats and attackers and all of that should be free. We should share it between each other. We should try to alert each other as much as possible. And that is a wonderful thing. And so there are a lot of feeds that you can go to kind of get this information, to kind of get this indicator of compromise, or these breadcrumbs, these Legos that you can use to assemble the greater picture of how an attacker operates. And we can use this to enrich our data that we collect. And so to give you a concept of how this works, if you have a SIEM or a log aggregator or some sort of platform that is looking at all of the information that is being generated from your devices, you can then set that information to be fed into another function that will analyze the information against threat data. You can take this open source intelligence and kind of aggregate it as well, and then compare and contrast. Does any of my data match the data for threats that have been seen on the internet? And one of the ways that we can do this is by identifying IP addresses, but there's also like file hashes, and file hashes are basically the fingerprint that a file leaves. And so if an attacker is using a specific type of file in their attack, and we suddenly see that on your systems where it's never been there before, we can be like, oh, well, I'm under attack by this specific organization. And you can kind of use this to attribute to a specific attacker, but you can primarily use this to identify when you're under attack. And this is the Lego set that you want. These are the pieces of information that you want to assemble to be able to defend your network and identify when you have a problem. And so open source intelligence can work both ways. But the key is that these pieces are left to assemble. Now, with open source intelligence on the defensive side, I don't think you're ever going to get enough pieces to assemble a full and complete object. You're just going to get like the bigger bricks, the bigger pieces, and it's going to be a thing where you're just going to have to kind of functionally imagine the end results as you gather the pieces. But if you can automate the process of analyzing the data that you're collecting against the data that is potentially malicious, and using that to alert you when you've been potentially compromised, that's going to help. Now, a lot of your tools are already doing that. If you have a modern EDR or antivirus with other add-ons like managed detection and response, that is all being done for you. You're already doing a lot of that. But some do it better than others, and it's important to understand that in order to have effective tools, you need to be able to do this sort of open source intelligence effectively. You need to be able to do it correctly and quickly. There are a ton of providers for these solutions out there, and one of the ways that we can analyze effective EDR, antivirus, or endpoint protection services, there's a service out there called Gartner, and what they do is they analyze solutions based on specific data that they collect. And this Gartner Magic Quadrant is basically has an X and a Y axis on this graph, and the x-axis is completeness of vision, where the y-axis is ability to execute on that vision. And basically, it's a graph of effective companies, about how effective companies are, what they're doing. And where you want to be in this graph is up on the top right quadrant. The further up in the top right quadrant you are, the better the solution is. And so, like I've said in the past, I don't like pushing solutions on people. I don't like pushing specific products on people, because you kind of have to figure out what works for your business. But for EDR, it is important to know that there are some key players that are absolutely amazing and they do a really good job. And the three on the top right, and they always kind of go between 1, 2, and 3, is CrowdStrike, Microsoft, and SentinelOne. So CrowdStrike, their Falcon endpoint protection, SentinelOne with their Ranger, and Microsoft with their Defender for Endpoint are all great. Now, their pricing is very different, and you can spend a shit ton of money on one of their solutions where another includes those licenses by default, or you don't have to spend nearly as much. But if you went with one of those three for a solution, you'd be pretty good. But again, you have to kind of figure it for yourself. But these companies do a lot of that detection and analysis for you really well. Like they link it up, and in terms of like Microsoft Defender probably is the most, I don't want to say complete, but they have the most information, because theirs is obviously tying directly into the operating system. What is Defender is already on every system already, and Defender for Endpoint does just a ton of stuff that you can leverage. That also can utilize and execute things like local policies and do things beyond the others. But CrowdStrike and SentinelOne are also very effective, because they do tend to get information right, and they do tend to get it before anybody else. So, those are some of the solutions that you can use. And then on top of that, to do this analysis automatically, you can also purchase additional licenses from companies like Huntress, who's an MDR. You can also do Rocket Cyber, who will do all sorts of knock and SOC operations for you for analysis and detailed threat hunting. And so there's a lot of information on here. One of the things to know is that if you're doing this yourself, if you're building your tools yourself, or not wanting to purchase it from one of these big guys, the thing to identify is that you are going to end up having a bunch of problems with noise, because there's going to be a lot of false positives generated off of your data that you're collecting and aggregating. And so it's kind of important to know that information and to silence the alarms as much as possible. And we'll cover log or alert fatigue here in another episode, but just suffice it to say that, and keep in mind when you're thinking about doing this for your organization, when you're thinking about using open source intelligence for your own defense, that there are a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of ways to incorporate it, and when you first start out on it, it's going to be a lot of noise. You're going to generate yourself a lot of alerts and a lot of false positives that you're going to end up having to review. And that is kind of how open source intelligence works. You take these Legos and you think you've got an image that works for you, and then all of a sudden it falls apart because you forgot to put in this one piece, and it's made the rest of your thing, your object that you're creating, really flimsy. And so to help remove that, you have to create yourself an opportunity to find those other pieces and to fine tune, and to basically do whatever you can with your imagination. Build the object based on what the pieces are that you're getting, and have that data available. Because honestly, if you don't have the right number of Legos, you can't play. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.